Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, April 27th, 2022. My name is Victoria Kirkland. On behalf of VMUG, I'd like to welcome you to today's Synology webcast, Let's Break Stuff, Backup and Recovery for Home and Businesses, presented by Cody Hall. Before we begin, I have three quick housekeeping items to go over. First, today's webcast will be recorded and available for you on demand. You will receive an email with the on-demand link, so keep an eye out for that. Second, a Q&A session will follow today's presentation, if we still have time. All questions will need to be entered in the question and answer section on the side. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We love to answer them. Third, there will be a short online evaluation that pops up as you exit the webcast. Please take a minute and let us know what you thought of today's session and what you might like to see going forward. All right, let's get started. Cody, I'll turn it over to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm taking control here. All right. Welcome, VMUG community. Thank you for tuning in to this Synology webcast. As Victoria mentioned, we're actually going to be going over some of the different Synology recoverability options that you're going to have. So what we're going to be doing is breaking some different things in your VMware environment, not so much the Synology side of things. So we're going to be deleting VMs, restoring them, all using the Synology ecosystem and all the software that is available inside of it. And all of this is going to be license free today. And the raffle at the end of our event today, there's going to be a QR code for a survey to take with Synology. That device that we're going to be raffling away actually can do everything that we're going through today. All of our backup software is going to be included with it because it's all license free. So with that said, as Victoria mentioned, I am Cody. I am a senior technical account manager here at Synology. I've been with the firm for going on 4 years now. And prior to this, in a past life, I worked as an MSP for 5 years in the Seattle area. So almost 10 years of experience in IT nowadays. And hopefully I have some insights that everybody can take with them today. Now, to begin, before we dive too deep into some of the other concepts today, I wanted to introduce Synology for those of you who might not know. So Synology, at its core, is a network-attached storage company. We build our own NAS devices, so we create, design, and actually build our own hardware. But we also write our own software for these solutions, and this is all first-party software like we're going to see today. And we also write our own operating system, DSM, or a Disk Station Manager. So that is the operating system we're going to be interacting with today. So since we actually create our own hardware and our own software, we're actually able to provide a unified experience on both those levels right from out of box whenever you actually get the Synology device. And the way I like to explain it for everybody who's new to the systems is that Synology is a lot like an IT Swiss Army knife. And operations in the IT world that would be usually be considered kind of complicated on another platform has a really short learning curve on Synology because it's all windowed based and there's wizards to help walk you through a lot of these different things. So even if you're not fluent in the platforms themselves, you can actually work through a lot of these processes without too much issue. So to set the mood for today, I wanted to touch base on one of the quotes that we actually have from someone we worked with, and they're a technology director at a public school district in the southeastern U.S. And this is kind of highlighting a lot of threats your data has associated with it as it works day in and day out. So your data is always at risk from various sources. Tornadoes can happen regularly in this area, so that could have destroyed their school and the servers themselves, for example. Also, at a school, cyber attacks are often pretty large targets. Main reason why they have this sentiment is a lot of schools, depending on where they are, have different policies for retention. So you have all of this data that you're retaining for long periods of time, so that makes it, unfortunately, a juicy target. Now, the last thing is since we're talking about a school in this quote, is we have thousands of students who actually would love to hack into the systems, change their grades, maybe on calculus or some other class that they were actually in. So despite that being mainly focused on the kind of schools and that kind of environment, accidents and attacks do happen to your data, and they all kind of line up to these different threats right here. So you have your simple accidents. That's stuff you typically can control, like accidentally deleting data or spilling coffee. But things like malicious behavior, natural disasters, and hardware failure are things that are typically out of your control. You can have a hacker, get into your system and ransom all of your data. You have natural disasters. We all know that we can't actually control Mother Nature. She's pretty wild. And you have hardware failures because, like everything, things break over time. Your motherboard could go bad on your server or what have you. So having the ability to get that data back after one of these events occurs is critical for your home lab, small businesses, and enterprises alike. So we're going to break some stuff and restore some things. So to do so, what we're going to focus on is actually a hypothetical situation, an example financial institution. And we're going to be working with this specific financial institution example as we work through this presentation. We're going to be essentially building layers of our different backup systems to create a robust strategy. So for this environment, this financial institution in this case has, hundreds of virtual machines, 175. They have 2,000 Microsoft 365 accounts and workstations for their users to actually work off of and access those Microsoft 365 accounts. So they need some backups for this environment. And the way that they're actually going to create this whole backup environment is by using Synology's Active Backup Suite. And more importantly, especially for the topic of today, which is, VMUG community, we're talking about VMs. We're talking about Active Backup for Business, which allows you to do bare metal images of your VMs, PCs, servers, and all of that stuff in both VMware and Hyper-V on top of that. So you're able to use this Active Backup for Business suite license free. It doesn't care how many hosts or sockets you have in your environment. So you're able to pretty much use it with impunity. And there's centralized management. You can see all of your data in one location on one dashboard. And once again, it's license free. So anyone who is actually utilizing this in their home labs with a Synology Plus series or higher can actually use this Active Backup entire suite. Now, we're going to be focusing on the business application for this, but we also have other active backup modules that'll back up your software as a service like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, for example. So what this topology is going to actually look like for this environment as we build out this first layer, this first level of backups, you're going to have a local Synology NAS alongside those workstations and those virtual machines in this environment. Now you're going to create a backup repository utilizing Active Backup for Business, and you're going to aggregate all this data finally into one location on the Synology NAS. So once we get these backups done, what you're going to be able to do is then add additional layers of redundancy, replicate it to another Synology NAS, or move it up to the cloud on top of that. So if there's ever a hardware failure at the virtual machine level, for example, you can actually utilize one of these specific recovery options that you're going to see inside of Active Backup for Business. Now, if there's an issue with this VM, you're going to notice that you have a whole list of checkboxes in this matrix that allows you to restore in a bunch of different ways. So for Windows servers, those physical devices, and VMs, you're going to notice there's all kinds of checkboxes like instant restoring to the VM host. You can do a cross-platform recovery, go from VMware to Hyper-V or Hyper-V to VMware. And you can also instant restore into our virtual machine manager, which is a lightweight hypervisor on the Synology NAS itself. And we'll actually see a couple of these different restore pathways today. Now, since this VM has gone down in this example scenario for that financial institution, what we're going to want to do is actually perform an instant restore to the virtual machine host. And this is the fastest restore option that you have available to Active Backup and the Synology ecosystem when using Active Backup for Business. So what we're going to do is instead of doing a full restore like this diagram shows, and we'll kind of explain what this whole restore process looks like. And in a typical restore process for a full restore, what you'll notice is that you have your VM host, you have the Synology NAS, and there's a backup image already on it. If something happened to the VM or the host itself, you could then bring that image back over and transfer the image via the network to that new VM host that is now functioning okay. And your backup image will be restored to that, and your VMs will begin functioning again. Now, what's going on here is you're actually restoring that entire backup. So it's going to be based on how large those VMs actually are and how big that data is. So you're at the mercy of your network speed and things like that. And your recovery time is going to be how long it takes to transfer and then boot up that virtual machine image inside of your host. Now, with an instant restore to a VMware environment, for example, it's a little bit different. So you still have that VM host going down in this example, and you have another one that you've stood up, and you still have that backup image on the Synology NAS. But instead of actually transferring that entire backup across to the new host, you can actually automatically mount that backup image as an NFS data store and instantly restore that VM into that new host. So your recovery time is actually more along the lines of just booting up the VM because you're not actually moving data around. You're just exposing a NFS data store automatically when you do this task here. So what we're going to do is show you how to do an instant restore like I just talked about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my camera, and then we're going to go ahead and share my screen real quick just to make the view a little bit bigger for everybody. Moment here. So here we are in our main NAS environment that we're going to be working off of today. This is going to be where our backups are already going to. So what we're going to first start off with is actually cause a mistake or a deletion inside of our VMware environment, and we're going to restore from the backups that are on this NAS. So I'm going to hop over to our VMware environment real quick. And you can see we're right in it right now. We have a Win10 VM already running on this. And just to give you a quick snapshot of what the topology looks like, we have our internal data store, and we also have an iSCSI data store that is running on a Synology NAS here at my home lab. And that is where this VM is actually running off of this Windows 10 VM. So what we're going to do is commit a crime here and go ahead and hard power off this VM. And we're going to, of course, delete it from our environment here. And so now it's gone. So what we're going to now do is go back over to that main Synology NAS, excuse me, this one right here. We're going to be on this main Synology NAS. We're going to open up our Active Backup for Business environment and show you what backups we do have. So on this first screen, you're going to notice you have your overview, and this is where that centralized management comes into play. You're actually able to view all of your backups from this one location right here. You can see different PCs, physical servers, file servers, and virtual machine tasks. You can see how they've been running. Green dots are good. Yellows would mean that you need to dig in a little bit farther, and you'll be warned if there's other critical errors also. You'll notice your storage status right here. That's basically a snapshot of how much storage is being utilized globally in Active Backup. And you'll notice that there's actually an ability to deduplicate your data in this platform. So that's why you're seeing only around 27 gigabytes listed here when we've actually backed up a little bit more than that. So if we go over to virtual machine, you'll notice that we actually have a VM already listed right here because we've paired back to our VMware hypervisor. And to do that, all you need to do is click Manage Hypervisor, and you're able to add it right now. And you'll basically just type in your IP address for your host, your root account if you're on a free ESXi, and if you're in a clustered environment with a vSphere cluster, you could actually point it to the domain name of that vSphere cluster as a whole, and it would see all the other nodes inside of that and all the VMs underneath that too. So we're already connected to that, so it can see directly into that VMware environment, and that's also because you actually have whenever Active Backup actually connects back into your VMware environment, it's all agentless, so it can just see directly into the hosts. You don't have to deal with any agents specifically on the VMs. So you're able to create and command tasks just from this window right here, rather than having to deal with an agent. You'll notice that it says VM not found in hypervisor. That's because Active Backup can tell that this device has a backup image on the NAS, but it's no longer in the hypervisor. So now something needs to be done. We actually need to do a restore. So we're going to do that. We're going to grab our green restore right here. We're going to go ahead and restore back to VMware vSphere in our case, but you can see there's other options. We'll get on to the Synology Virtual Machine Manager restore in a bit, but we're going to focus on getting this all back and up and running as quickly as possible. We're going to do an instant restore rather than a full one. So the instant restore will mount that NFS data store, and it's the quicker restore. We're going to restore to our original location, but I wanted everybody to keep in mind that if you wanted to actually do a restore to a new location, a different node in your hypervisor cluster, for example, you could definitely do that. Let's say if the main host went down, you could drop it into another node and go from there. So with this one, we're just going to restore to the original location because our host is still up and running. We're going to hit power on automatically and begin this whole process right here. So this happens kind of quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over to the VMware environment. And in a couple seconds, you're going to see some activity here at the bottom of the recent tasks inside of this VMware environment. So you're going to start seeing it actually building this VM in just a moment. And just in a couple seconds, you'll be able to see this VM pop up here. Now we're going to answer the question. It's already booting up. And as we pop into it, you're going to notice that you're going to see the all too familiar Windows screen and the dancing circular dots, which is showing that it's indeed booting up in this case. So we're going to let that finish up its normal boot process. I'm not going to make anybody watch that entire process here today. I think we've all seen it before. But with that said, I wanted to point out some of the other things that have happened in your VMware environment now that we've done that instant restore. So since we did that instant restore, we've mounted that NFS data store automatically, and that is reflected under your storage location for your data storage. You'll notice we have that data store 1, that's internal to the host. We have our other iSCSI location that's on a Synology NAS right here. But you'll notice there is the NFS data store that's been automatically populated, and it's the IP address of our NAS with the folder that backup image was from. So that's Active Backup for Business communicating directly with your ESXi environment in this case. Now, before we hop back over to the presentation, I wanted to show you how long that took in this scenario. So in this scenario, to do that instant restore into your VMware environment, it took all of about 27 seconds. So you can get back up and running typically within about 30 seconds. And if you ever need to finalize your actual changes that you make to the VM, there is this migrate VM button. And this is the only time that licenses come into play for Active Backup for Business. And it's not even a license on the Active Backup side. This is the license for VMware and vMotion specifically. So what this migrate VM button does is if you have those vMotion licenses, you're able to commit your changes and vMotion the VM off of that NFS data store back onto a production one to kind of finalize everything. But you can see how quickly the process is to get that VM back into your VMware environment using that Active Backup Instant Restore. Camera back on here. So we walked through actually creating the VM through an instant restore with Active Backup for Business using the actual images that we created on our initial backup task. So let's go ahead and start talking about some other things that could happen in your environment, not just in VMs, for example. So we have this same institution. It's still backing up a bunch of data from their VMware environment, and it's also backing up a bunch of data from their workstations and things like that. So what we're going to do here is go over what if, a PC hardware failure occurs, and let's say, a motherboard dies or what have you on a specific laptop. Now, Active Backup for Business does full bare metal images of your devices and your VMs and that kind of thing. And it also allows you to do some file level recovery. You can basically mount those images and browse through the files and pull different data out individually as you need. So there's some flexible options there. But sometimes that file recovery operation isn't really enough. And this is a funny scenario that I actually worked with a university client of ours, and they use Active Backup for Business in their environment for some staff members. So in this case, I think everybody can get a little laugh about this. The staff asked, my computer died and I need an Excel file on it right away. And I think as admins or IT professionals in general, we know whenever someone needs a restoration, they expect it to be near instant. So that's the sentiment that they're conveying here. And the IT admin that we worked with at this university says, no problem. I use Synology. I back up these different devices using Active Backup. I can pull that file or folder out, no problem. What's the name of it? Well, this user says, I don't know. It's in Excel. I actually just open Excel, and it's always right at the top. What they're explaining here is they only grab this file in Excel through their recent files. Their recently opened files. So they actually don't know where this file lives on their computer. They just grab it through the Excel recent files. So that user then, our admin in this case, grumbled a little bit, but then reached out to us to kind of explore some of the other recoverability options that were available to them since they were backing up through this platform. So in this case, what you'll notice is we're going to take a different look at this recovery matrix for your environment. Now, you have your Windows PCs, your Windows servers, your VMware Hyper-V columns, and all that stuff. You'll notice that with the Windows servers, they have almost every single checkbox already placed inside of this matrix. So you can do file level, full system restore, instant restore to VMs, all that stuff. You'll notice Windows PCs do not have that listed, but that does not mean that you cannot spin up a Windows 10 PC as a VM, either in VMware or on our hypervisor. It's just how we organize things in the system, and you can actually promote a Windows 10 PC into the Windows Server category. And what that does is it gives it all of the recoverability options that you see in that Windows Server column right there. So with that in mind, what we're going to instead do is actually spin up a Windows PC utilizing this entire ecosystem here today. So what you're going to see here is we're going to use the Instant Restore to Synology's Virtual Machine Manager. And this is a QEMU-based hypervisor that is included with the Synology NAS. You can download it from Package Center, and it does a couple other things inside of this solution. One, you can sandbox your environment. You can spin data up on it. You can spin up images like we saw here, but it also allows you to do backup verification for your Active Backup for Business images. What that means is that actually will take a video, a low resolution video of Active Backup for Business spinning up this VM in the Virtual Machine Manager hypervisor. It'll take a video and it'll be placed into the version so you can review those and make sure that your backups are working correctly, because the video goes all the way to where the VM boots into the login screen. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about what this instant restore actually looks like, because in this case, we don't have any VMware environments or other hosts involved in this environment whenever we do an instant restore to Synology Virtual Machine Manager. So in this case, you have a PC server VM, it goes down, there's something wrong with it. In our example, we're talking about a Windows 10 PC. So let's say, the motherboard died or something along those lines. Now, in this case, you'll have your server with your backup images. That's the Synology NAS that is taken backups through Active Backup for Business. And you have the Virtual Machine Manager application already built in to the Synology system. It's already been installed. Now, after you do the restore, you're able to run the PC as a virtual machine, and that's because Active Backup for Business, you've noticed that there's a couple instant restore options available in it, and one of those is directly into Virtual Machine Manager. And that means that Active Backup for Business and your backup images can communicate seamlessly with Virtual Machine Manager without any additional conversions that need to take place whenever you do this restore. So whenever you actually do this boot up, you're going to notice that you're actually able to recover this solution typically in just a few seconds. You're actually just importing it into your Virtual Machine Manager environment, booting it up, and then you can actually connect into it. So what we're going to do is take a look at that right now and walk through that whole process. So I'm going to turn off my camera once again. So we're going to open this back up. We're going to go back into Active Backup for Business. And instead of going into virtual machine like we did before, you would actually start out in a PC section right here. And now your Windows 10 PCs would live right here after you do your initial backups. And there's going to be a little button off to the right that says change device type. And that'll let you promote it to a Windows 10 or Windows Server, excuse me. And that drops it into this category right here. You'll notice that we already have a device inside of this environment that we've promoted to a Windows Server category. And you'll notice it's actually a Windows 10 PC, even though it's in this different category here. So because of that, we're actually able to use our other restore options that are available to this. So just like before, we're able to pick a version we want to restore to. You're actually going to now be able to choose where you actually want to restore this onto. So if you have additional resources in your VMware environment, then you're actually going to be able to instant restore directly into there. But let's say your host is full, you don't have additional compute resources available, so you want to just spin this up, in the least impactful way possible. So you can use this instant restore to the Virtual Machine Manager button. And now what we're going to begin doing is selecting where on the Synology NAS you actually want this to be spun up on. So we're going to choose the storage we want to spin this up on. We're going to rename this if we wanted to. I'm just going to rename this VMUG Win 10. And we're going to be able to check and change what CPUs and memory this is going to have available to it. Like you could drop down the amount of CPUs that are available in it if you wanted to. You're then going to be able to add in any virtual disks that you need. We're just going to leave it default in our case, but you can add additional ones. You're going to choose what network you want this to live on. We're going to use your default VM network, but if you had a Synology NAS with multiple NICs or different network topologies applied to them, you could specifically have this virtual machine live on that network that you create for your virtual machine manager environment. And lastly, you can inject other ISO files into this restore. And what's good about this is we have our own VMM guest tool. And what that means is it's very similar to VMware guest tools. For example, you're able to install this just to make the VMs run a little bit better and react a little bit better to your inputs. It's not really required for this quick restore process, but if you're going to leave it restored for a while, VMM guest tools is definitely something you'd want to get installed. So now we're going to go ahead and choose who actually has permissions to this. And you'll notice that I have this connected to a cloud-based LDAP service right now. So what you're able to do is actually join a Synology NAS to a domain. And you can then authenticate with that Synology NAS through your domain credentials. And you're able to provide permissions to your domain users to different backup images and other applications. So that's why you're seeing this here. So you could apply permissions for this specific VM to your domain or LDAP users. But for us, we're going to do our local one and just use my local user right here. And we're going to go ahead and power it on right now. And whenever I hit done, it's going to open up a new window. We're no longer in Active Backup for Business. We're actually in Virtual Machine Manager. It automatically opens it, and now it is now importing this VM into this environment, basically just getting it into the Virtual Machine Manager environment. So that's all done already, and we're able to now power it on. So now we're done restoring it into Virtual Machine Manager, and we're now just spinning it up. In a couple of seconds, we're going to be able to hit the connect button right here. What that does is it allows us to open up our essentially web console for this specific image. So we're going to let this run and finish its boot process here. And again, whenever we see the circular dots at the bottom, I think we'll call it good because that's the normal Windows boot procedure. And again, I think we've all seen that quite a few times. So just a couple more seconds here. There you have it. So that's how easy it is to pull this VM into Virtual Machine Manager, and you're able to actually get this spun up just directly on the Synology NAS. So this all occurred from the Synology NAS. It pulled the backup image from the physical device through Active Backup for Business onto the NAS, and it was able to restore to that same NAS box, so you weren't going to impact any of your other resources. So while this finishes its boot process, let's hop back over to this NAS that we actually did the restore on in our case. I wanted to show one really interesting feature here is you can actually share a link to that web console to external users. And this is actually what our our actual clients at the university, for our example, actually did. They spun up that user's image as a VM, and they gave that user access to that VM through our web console by creating the share link. And you can password protect the link itself. So they were able to give their end users a direct web console access to a version of their PC the day that backup version was taken. So they could, of course, go in and find that recent file in Excel. Kind of a funny way to utilize all the different restore features inside of Active Backup and the Synology ecosystem, but it just shows how flexible the solutions are as a whole. Now, real fast, I wanted to show that there's also a migrate option for the restore status for Synology Virtual Machine Manager. You're actually going to be able to now migrate this VM off of the Virtual Machine Manager environment and then back into your VMware environment if you ever needed to. That's actually a pretty new feature with a new iteration of Active Backup for Business. So there's ways to migrate any changes you've made off of those instant restores and back into production. All right, so that's our first layer down for our backups here. So we've gone through backing up the virtual machines, the Microsoft 365 accounts are a different module, but you can reach out to us if you want more information on that. And we took care of a restore for a physical device, a physical Windows 10 PC, and we spun it up as a VM on our NAS device. So what we'll need to do in this case is add an additional layer or two to this environment. Now, Active Backup is a robust solution, but what if a natural disaster hits your main office and pretty much everything goes down inside of your environment? You'll need additional layers at a secondary location to help take care of that data. And the way that you're going to do that, the main way that you're going to do that is by adding a secondary Synology NAS and utilizing a snapshot replication package. Now, this is going to take care of your second backups, your second layer. And snapshot replication is something that actually utilizes our BeachRFS file system, and this is like a front-end UI of it. So you can actually replicate your shared folder data to a secondary Synology NAS device, and it integrates seamlessly with Active Backup for Business. So you can take your deduplicated Active Backup data and replicate that off-site to another Synology NAS device and fail over to that secondary site and reconstitute your data and bring it into another Active Backup for Business instance. Once that's actually done, you're then going to be able to, spin up your PCs or your other images pretty much with ease at that point. And there's also all that great failover functionality, but you can also fail back your data. So if you make any changes to your data and commit those changes, you can actually fail back your data, bring back that new data across, and retain your original topology. So what this all looks like here You have your backup repository on your local Synology NAS. This is your source. Then you have your second backup through snapshot replication offsite, and that's your destination. And if there was ever an issue with your first one, you can fail over to your second Synology NAS. You can have another instance of active backup there, and you could reconstitute that data. And of course, from there, after you link that replication repository, you're able to then bring that back into your VM host. Very basically the same process that we saw when we instant restored that VM into our ESXi host in this case. So let's go ahead and begin this whole process. We're not going to show you the instant restore again because you guys just saw that in the first demo of today. So we're going to go ahead and just show you how to do the entire failover process in this case. So your recovery time, whenever we go through this, is really just initiating that failover and then hitting that instant restore to the VM host. Now, the initiation of the failover is usually a pretty quick process because there's already a copy of data at that secondary site. So it's really just making that data writable and then relinking that folder, and then it's usually about a 30-second instant restore as you saw previously. So let's take a look at what this all looks like here. So I'm going to turn off my camera. So we're on our main Synology NAS device here. What we're going to do next is actually go ahead and open up our snapshot replication package and just kind of show you what we have set up so far. So what I can show you now is that you actually have your summary page. This will be pretty blank if you haven't done a replication yet. Now you have your local snapshots, which are snapshots that you haven't replicated that you can create to actually provide versioning for your shared folders and that kind of thing on the Synology NAS. This is definitely something you'd want to do if you're using the Synology as a file server. And it's really easy to set up your local snapshots. You can just click on settings, go to enable for your local snapshots. They can be up to every hour, and you can go down to every 5 minutes even if you wanted to. Just whenever you do create more snapshots, that's just a little bit more load on the system. Now, whenever you go to retention, you're able to set up your retention policy for your local snapshots, of course. And you can set maximum number of snapshots to retain, but it's up to 1,024 snapshots for a shared folder snapshot task. You can also do keep all your snapshots for a specified point of time, or you could set a customized policy that's more of a grandparent, parent, child setup for your rules here. We usually say if you're going to do a setup like this, the default is a pretty good, robust solution. But if you had different requirements for your environment, you could definitely alter these parameters here. Now, advanced is just for making snapshots visible virtually and also setting up your snapshots based on Greenwich Mean Time, for example. But that's not really something you really need to do unless you're snapshotting and replicating across time zones and you wanted all your time zones to actually meet up. But that's how you create your local snapshots. Replication is pretty much a very similar process. And if you go and hit create here, it'll open up a wizard and walk you through the process. So even if you weren't sure about actually how to do this process, you can walk through and read all of these different points that are inside of the wizard. So we can go to remote, we can choose another Synology inside of our network, for example. And this one is for replicating internal to our network because I have more than one Synology NAS here. But keep in mind, this whole system is actually designed to replicate off-site. So you can definitely do that. And you can do an encrypted connection, and this can be operated through a VPN too. So you can definitely replicate off-site. This is how it was designed. I just happen to have a couple different NAS here. I'm going to go ahead and shoot this over to another NAS device. And I'm going to change my port at the destination server here. Actually, right here. I'm going to go to a different one. So we're going to go to a different NAS I have here right now. And you can see that you're actually able now to select where you want this replication task to go on that specific NAS device. There's just one volume on this Indigo DR NAS, so we're just going to shoot it over there. And you can choose what folders you actually want to back up to that, actually snapshot to that other Synology NAS in this case. So you can select what folders you actually want to replicate across. So for us, we would do our active backup for business folder right here, but we actually already have a replication occurring for this folder to the destination, so we don't need to create a new one. But you can select whatever folders you want and go through the whole replication process. So in this environment, you'll notice that there's an ability to send your initial copy over the network, or you can even seed your environment, use an external USB or another piece of storage to actually seed your replication environment. And what's good about that is if you have terabytes and terabytes of data, you can actually use this seeding mechanism to not chew through your bandwidth for the initial replication. After that initial replication, though, it is typically just taking care of your changed data. So it's only really sending the data over that has been changed since the previous replication window. So for us in this case, we would just go over the wire here on our local network, since our local network has pretty good speeds. And then you can set up your replication policies for your environment itself. Now, inside of the replication schedule, it's a different schedule than you actually set up for your local snapshots. So these are a different retention and scheduling policy. You can go up to every hour or even more frequently than that. You can actually set a transfer window and block out periods of time when you don't want the replication to occur. So if you didn't want it to happen during the day, you could block that out, and you can get pretty granular and customize, where you do and do not want the replication to occur. Now, this is the retention policy for your specific replication task for sending it to the destination. You can do up to 1024 just like before, set a specific number to retain, or do a grandparent, parent, child setup like you see here. Again, you can change a couple settings like replicating local snapshots for added redundancy, because those are separate from these. So you could definitely do that. Just know that this whole operation might take a little longer because you're sending more snapshots and more data in this case. And of course, you can also set your time zone to Greenwich Mean Time, which is good, especially if you're replicating across the country, the United States, for example, or around the world. This would be a good way to standardize on that time zone, so you're not mixing up the timestamps that are actually on those snapshots themselves. And that's pretty much it for setting up a replication task. You'll notice that we're now able to let this replication finish up. So what you'll notice behind this window is it's actually going to begin populating that replication task, creating that link with the destination, and it'll begin that whole process. So that's how you create a replication task. Let's go through the failover process. And to do that, we're going to need to go over to our secondary site, that Indigo DR solution right here, and we're going to fail over and bring that data live again. So if we go into the snapshot menu here at the destination and go to replication, this is basically just the other end of your replication environment. So what we're going to do is hit recovery here and actually perform a failover. Now, the failover button, the one that you would use if something was actually wrong, is grayed out because this is a healthy snapshot environment. It hasn't missed any instances yet. So what we're going to do is force a failover, or you could test it also, which is another good point to bring up. If you're doing a layered backup solution like this with failover options, you do want to test your failovers every so often. So there's some options for that inside of this Synology ecosystem, and we're going to go ahead and force it here in just a moment. So we're going to force this failover, use our most recent snapshot, and we're going to let this continue here. So you can see the failover is indeed occurring. And then in just a couple seconds, we should see an orange symbol that says that there is a warning on this thing right here. So now it says, warning, this has been failed over to the server, which is a good thing. We just told it to do that. So this is what it would look like if it was failed over in a normal instance. So now we have this active backup for business -1 folder that has been brought live in our environment. It's now readable and writable. If we go to our active backup for business environment, this is a brand new instance here. And you'll notice there's no backups in PCs, physical servers, file servers, virtual machines. We're not even connected to a hypervisor yet. If we go to storage, there's not even any storage there. So what we need to do is bring this folder into this environment. This is the folder we brought live after the snapshot failover. You'll notice that it can see that there's virtual machine and physical server tasks like we were dealing with before, and we can relink this data. So once this is done, this whole relinking process, that's all it took. It was just a couple seconds there. You'll notice that we have this folder now as storage. We're still getting our deduplication ratio right now that we had previously. And if we start going to the other modules inside of Active Backup, like physical server, you're going to notice that we have tasks there that we didn't have before. So we still have the Windows server or the Windows 10 PC that's added as a server, that task that's associated with it. And we also have the different tasks for our VM right here. So for us, what we're going to need to do here is actually go ahead and edit this. I need to retype in my credentials because they're not saved. And then once I do that, it's going to basically grab that server again. We're going to go back to green for ESXi, and now we're back inside of that environment. So now that we have connection to our hypervisor host and we have the task list now, we can go through our restore process that we did previously, which is the same thing as choosing a VM you want to restore, restoring to VMware once again, and you're just going through that instant restore process. If you did the instant restore, once again, that'd be around a 30-second restore, and you could migrate any of those changes and fail back whenever you're all ready to go back to normal. Now, once you complete those migrations, you'll actually want to go back into snapshot replication and go back into recovery and perform a reprotect procedure. Now, reprotect is what we call failing back. And what this does is it allows you to specify what data you want to go where and what you want the topology to be for this replication task. So for us, we want our source server to be Indigo because our DR solution was our original destination. So we still want our source server to be that Indigo device, but we want to reprotect with data that was created from Indigo DR. So we still have the same topology from the original source to destination, but we have the new data that we created during that whole failover and DR scenario. So whenever we reprotect, it's going to perform a reprotection process, bring that new data back over, and it's also going to also perform a switchover process to make sure the topology is the same. Okay, so we went through our couple different layers right there. So we have this couple different replication task scenarios that I want to discuss because as you remember, you're able to seed your environment. So let's talk about why you might actually want to do that with some diagrams and some help. So let's say you have a replication source at site A, and then you have your destination, which is site B, and you have a huge active backup business backup database. It's 100 terabytes. It's been running great, but you wanted some additional layers. So if you only had a 20 megabits per second internet speed for around 100 terabytes, this is going to take a really long time to actually replicate that backup database over to site B. It's actually going to take around 440 days, which is not ideal, especially since you're probably going to be changing a lot of that data over that year plus in that scenario. So that's where seeding comes into play. If we take our initial replication task and actually do it over our local network, that's one option you have. You can actually replicate that 100 terabytes over maybe a 10G connection locally and send it to that secondary device while you're still on the local network, and then physically ship that second device to the secondary location. And you can edit the task so that it respects the new IP and credentials that you need for that new location. And it basically will be able to continue on as if had been replicated normally. So what's great about doing it this way is you can take a large backup repository like that and transfer it in about 20 hours, and then you can actually physically pick up that device and bring it to that secondary location and edit the task and all that stuff. So that kind of gets around bandwidth limitations you might have for your WAN connection out from your network. Now, let's say you had a smaller replication task. So we're talking kind of about seeding your replication task using a local device because your backup repository was pretty large. You can't fit it on a hard drive. But if you did have a smaller backup repository that was only around 10 terabytes and you had that same network connection to that secondary site, that would still take some time. It would still take about 44 days. So if we actually do an external USB device, like an external hard drive, for example, because we can easily get a 10 terabyte hard drive these days, what you can do is put that initial replication task onto the hard drive and physically ship that rather than your Synology NAS to the secondary location. Now, this is possible if you have a smaller repository, as we mentioned, and that's all good. But if you have a larger repository, you could actually use the physical Synology NAS and physically ship that to the secondary site once you complete that replication locally. So now we've gone through this financial institution. There's several different layers that we've talked about. We have our first layer, our backup repository using Active Backup for Business, and that's replicating to the offsite Synology NAS. But let's say you didn't have a secondary site or you didn't have a secondary Synology NAS. What you could do in this case is actually back up to our cloud environment or a cloud environment utilizing Hyper Backup. So you can back up your data on Active Backup for Business and then back that up to a cloud provider like Synology C2 or another one. What's great about this backup solution is it actually is able to back up just your deduplicated data up to those destinations. So Hyper Backup, it works with pretty much all major cloud providers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and any other S3 compatible services. So if you are looking through the list of different options that you have with this, you may notice that some larger players that you're probably used to isn't explicitly listed in the menu. For example, Backblaze, Wasabi, they aren't going to be listed as destinations, but they are S3 compatible on the back end. Their APIs are. So what you do is actually go and create an S3 task and use a custom URL. And there's guides on Backblaze and Wasabi to get that done utilizing Synology and Hyper Backup. So check those out. But if you were looking for a different cloud provider, we think it's best to use Synology C2 storage as your backup destination utilizing Hyper Backup because it's integrated with the Synology NAS. There's no extra restoration costs. There's no ingress or egress fees. And you have client-side encryption before ever uploading. You're able to do AES 256-bit encryption and RSA 2048-bit encryption before it ever leaves the Synology NAS, and your data is actually encrypted in transit too. On top of that, since this is the part of the Synology ecosystem and it's integrated, you can actually unpack your backups utilizing a backup explorer on the NAS or in the cloud, which is not possible on other backup destinations. So even if your local Synology NAS is gone, you can still log into C2 storage, mount those backups, unpack them, and restore them through your web browser and actually download them through your web browser. So that extra little feature there is why you would want to use Synology C2 as your destination. So we're getting close to wrapping a couple things up here today. I just wanted to touch base on the raffle that we're doing today. So what we have for today is a Synology DS220 Plus device. And I actually have a smaller, older version of this, a DS218 Plus that I use personally. And I love it. It's a great media server. You can back up your photos to it and all that stuff. But being a Plus series device means it can actually do everything that we talked about today. Active Backup for Business, snapshot replication, Hyper Backup. You can also use Virtual Machine Manager. You might want to get a little bit more RAM for it, but it can definitely run Virtual Machine Manager. So you can do everything we talked about today with this Synology NAS. So I'm going to leave this menu up here. Go ahead and pull out your cell phones and grab this QR code to fill out our survey. Just fill it out, and that'll enter you in to get a raffle. And type in the correct phone number for yourself and email so that we can actually get in contact with you if you do win. So definitely do that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and probably take some questions here for the last few minutes because I think we have a little bit of time left. So just one moment. Let me see what we have here. So I have a couple other questions that we had on the side. So a couple questions we had are, with replication, is it just a one-to-one replication or can you do more? So with Synology's snapshot replication, something that you can do with that is you can actually do an extended replication. So you can replicate to one destination and then from there to another. And there's other topologies that you can actually create too, like an active-active replication where they replicate back and forth to each other and things like that. There was a couple other questions about the size of your backup amount, like if you had, let's say 500 users or something like that, how large of a NAS might you need or what are the limitations for that? Now, up to like 500 users or so, we have some guides for how to select a Synology NAS. And in fact, that case study that I talked about, where we did that instant restore to Synology's virtual machine manager, that's a university in Washington here, and they actually back up around 500 machines utilizing Active Backup for Business on a 12-bay desktop device called a DS3617XS in their environment. And there's a couple refreshed models for that today. But if you wanted to go over 500 or something like that, we do recommend reaching out to us so that we can make sure that we can estimate the storage that you need accurately, and also taking some other considerations, like if you wanted to back up something else, for example. Because you can do a lot with Synology, and we want to make sure that you're getting the correct device to be as flexible as you need it. Cool. Another question that we had is if you delete a backup task for a user, or does it actually delete all of the data too? So basically, what I'm imagining here is, like, let's say you had a backup task that was grabbing a specific device for some period of time. You could actually deselect that backup image for a bit, and they would actually be, you'd be actually able to back up and all that stuff. We're actually getting a live one here, a live question here. It looks like John, thanks for the question. Do your NAS devices integrate as storage target with Veeam backup and recovery? So that's a good question. We actually a lot of times whenever people use Synology, we are usually used first as a bucket for Veeam. So there's a couple different forums online you can go and check out. But yes, that is usually how people get started with Synology. First is by using us as a Veeam target. That being said, once they actually see the NAS and they're like, great, it's a target, and then oftentimes they don't understand what the rest features are inside of it. So definitely, if you're mid-cycle or getting close to the end of your subscription on Veeam, don't forget about Active Backup for Business. Check it out, because you could really help with some license fees on that, because it's all included with the NAS. So check that out too. But yes, we can be a backup repository for Veeam if you wanted to go that direction. I think we're pretty good here, actually. I'm not seeing too many other questions popping in, but feel free to fire away if you have any questions. Hmm. Interesting. So Gary, it sounds like you were using Veeam Target as a NAS and then tried to C2 storage, and it kept sending a huge file up, even though maybe some things were changed. So yeah, I guess I'm not sure why. You might want to maybe reach out to Veeam for what's going on with their stuff, because I can't, really speak to what might have been going on in that case. But with Synology C2 storage and Hyper Backup and Active Backup for Business, that I know for a fact that's not even an issue. It's going to be sending just deduplicated data up and that kind of thing, and it's the Hyper Backup task itself is block level incremental. Yeah, John. So yes, all software demo today is included with the purchase of any Plus Series device. So any Plus Series or up can use every single thing we talked about, including Active Backup, snapshot replication, Hyper Backup. That's all included. We honestly, it doesn't really matter, how many hosts or sockets or VMs you have. There's not going to be any additional licenses like once you hit 500. The only thing you want to keep in mind is if you are looking to use Active Backup, just making sure you get the right size device to house all of the data. So, and John, it looks like you were nice enough to put in your organization that you're with, Hamilton College. We do have an EDU team for end users that you guys can reach out to us. That email is actually onboarding, onboarding at synologyamerica.com. So onboarding at synologyamerica.com. We can help spec out a device for you if you wanted to go that direction. Even if it's on a personal level, that's fine too. No problem, John. Happy thinking. Let us know if you have any questions. Yeah, so Linux, good question on Linux. So Chris asked this question. So with this, we actually have a location under the physical servers tab to actually do Linux backups. So we can do backups with Active Backup for Business using physical Linux devices. They're pretty much all the major distros you can think of are covered in it. And what I think is kind of fun about it is we're actually able to do our agent for Linux actually at the command line level. So if you're a Linux person and you like kind of messing around in the command line and that kind of thing, we have an awesome guide for actually getting your backup set up using Active Backup for Business and that command line agent. So you can definitely do bare metal backups for your Linux devices. You can still do file level restores, and there's still cross-platform recovery, instant restoring, and all that stuff. So that's a good question. So this one's from Daniel. With a single Synology box, what is the best way to protect PCs from encryption? Malware gets control of shares. Do we need to create a snap to a different volume? All that stuff. So one of the best ways to help with ransomware is to actually have a versioned backup solution. So there's actually not going to be anything that's monitoring your devices from the Synology NAS side. It's not an antivirus. So if you have if you have a concern for that on your network, you'd want to look at some other malware detection software inside of your environment. Where the Synology comes into play is by having those versions. So it could very well suck up a backup image, a version that has some encryption on it. But what you can do is go back to a previous version and one that you know is fine and restored to that once it's cleared from your network. That's totally fine, and that's totally usable if your NAS isn't compromised also, because a lot of times ransomware, it might compromise like a domain account or something like that. But to your point though, snapshot replication, having that other layer is helpful if more than one thing happens to be compromised. What you want to do is, yes, snapshot offsite to a different location, not even just a different volume. And what you'll want to do in that case is use different credentials to log in to that secondary site. So you don't want to use the same admin credentials for every device nationally for your organization or what have you. By doing different credentials, you don't have to automatically assume the destination credentials are also compromised. So the best way to help mitigate ransomware is by having those versions in place and being able to roll back to those. And in terms of monitoring your devices, that's more of looking at other monitoring tools that you can put on the device or the network. Also, Gary, good question. Do you have a Mac OS agent to back up MacBook Pro? So, not right now, but that is probably the most requested option inside of Active Backup for Business. And I do know we're working on it, and I do know it is coming. I don't have a timeline for that right now. But a couple of different things that we can do with the Synology. One, we can be a time machine backup destination for your Mac devices, so you can actually use the NAS as a time machine repository. That's great and all, but time machine doesn't have dedupe, so that's a limitation on time machine. We also have another platform called Synology Drive that is more for syncing between devices, but there is backup tasks inside of that. And Synology Drive can do file level backups of your Mac devices. So you can do a file level backup if you need to your Synology NAS. But yeah, the Active Backup for Business agent, that's still incoming. I do also know we're working on integrating other solutions into our cloud offerings too. We have some different cloud backup options, like directly backing up your endpoints to our cloud platform. That's definitely something we're exploring. And so you might see us adding features like a Mac backup there first, because our clouds can be a little bit more nimble than having to test for 10 years of devices across our library. So what I would expect to see the Mac backup beta to happen on our cloud first, and then you'd see it rolled out to the physical Active Backup for Business environment. So no, right now, keep an eye out for it though. We're working on it. It should be done fairly soon, but there's a couple other backup options inside of Synology, either Synology Drive or using us as a time machine destination. That'd be a good thing to use in the interim. Good question though, Gary. Thank you. What what version of DSM is needed from Joseph? Great question also. So we had been running DSM version 6 for quite some time, and we just released 7, so not sure which one you're on. But Active Backup for Business works on DSM 6.2, 3.4, all that stuff. So you would want to stay up to the most current version for either version 6 or 7 pretty much at all times, because we do update our security and stuff for those devices. So you'll want to be updated on that end, but Active Backup for Business, everything you saw today works on 6.2.4 as well as the latest version of DSM-7. I personally would say you would want to use DSM-7 because there's a lot of new fun stuff that you can do inside of it that isn't coming to DSM-6. But yeah, both those different versions work. Well, it looks like that's the last question from the day. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this VMUG webcast with Synology. Make sure you fill out the survey. Victoria, go ahead and take over when you're ready.
Thank you, Cody, for taking the time to speak to us today. Please complete the online evaluation that pops up as you exit this webcast. As a reminder to our audience, you'll receive a follow-up email with the on-demand link from today's webcast. To find out more about the VMUG webcast program, visit vmug.com and check out the page there. From all of us here at VMUG, thank you and have a great rest of your day.